For post-war Britain, Marks & Spencer was more than just a retail chain. It was a symbol of national dignity and an unspoken contract between business and the people. In an era when the world was rebuilding from ruins, M&S offered something unprecedented: the luxury of quality available to every working person. Under its own St. Michael brand, the company created an empire where the word British was synonymous with best. In the 1950s and 60s, M&S sourced an incredible 99% of its goods from local manufacturers. It was a closed, thriving ecosystem. From sheep farms in Scotland to textile mills in Lancashire, the entire country worked so that the average Briton could wear a jumper that wouldn't lose its shape for decades. This period hits hard because of its sheer honesty. Back then, a shopper in London or Manchester knew that if the label bore the name St. Michael, the item had passed the strictest quality control. M&S dictated terms to suppliers, but it also gave them stability, investing in technology and worker training. It was an era of conscious consumption, long before the term became trendy. People bought one wool skirt or one overcoat to last for years, and M&S took pride in the fact that their clothes outlived fashion trends and generations. The company's stores were cathedrals of the middle class, where perfect order reigned, and sales assistants were the elite of the service industry. We look at archival footage from those years and see a nation that trusted its flagship store as unconditionally as it trusted the monarchy. It was a story of mutual devotion. The brand supported British industry, and the nation responded with absolute loyalty. Marks & Spencer was the soul of the British High Street, a guarantor that even in a changing world, some things remained constant. Sturdy seams, natural cotton, and a fair price for honest labor. But behind the facade of this golden age, changes were already beginning to simmer, leading toward the most painful breakup in the history of British retail. By the late 90s, clouds were gathering over Marks & Spencer's London headquarters. The fashion world was shifting rapidly. Fast fashion brands like Gap and Next were aggressively entering the British market, offering trendier styles at lower prices. M&S shareholders demanded profit growth, and the old model of British quality at a fair price began to look cumbersome and too expensive to them. In 1999, the company's management made a decision that would forever alter the country's economic landscape. To cut costs, M&S announced a radical shift of production overseas. It was a deal with the devil, an attempt to buy corporate survival at the cost of an entire industry's demise. This moment hits hard because of its suddenness and the sheer scale of the betrayal. For decades, M&S had been the anchor client for hundreds of British factories. When the company tore up long-standing contracts overnight, regions like Yorkshire, Lancashire, and Wales faced a genuine industrial apocalypse. Textile mills that had survived 2 world wars were shut down within weeks. Thousands of hereditary weavers and seamstresses found themselves on the street. For many towns, this meant death. The closure of an M&S supplier factory was equivalent to a cardiac arrest in a small community. People felt they hadn't just been laid off, they had been betrayed by those they trusted like family. The cynicism of the situation lay in management's belief that the customer wouldn't notice the difference. They hoped that the magic of the St. Michael brand would mask the scent of cheap production from Morocco, Turkey, or Sri Lanka. But they forgot one crucial detail. The soul of Marks & Spencer resided in the invisible thread connecting the British maker and the British buyer. Once that thread was severed, the company ceased to be a national treasure. and became just another faceless global player. It was the beginning of the end for the very unique quality that people were willing to pay a premium for. The chain of trust had broken, and piecing it back together proved impossible. The ultimate symbol of the break with the past was the abandonment of the legendary St. Michael brand. In the early 2000s, M&S management decided to rebrand, viewing St. Michael as too old-fashioned. They wanted to look modern, but along with the name, the legendary quality began to vanish from the labels. Customers who for decades had been used to picking items off the shelves without a second thought suddenly found their favorite stores filled with garments that hit hard with their imperfections. Fabrics became thinner, cheap synthetics filled the compositions, and cuts that once fit any figure perfectly became unpredictable. The disillusionment set in quickly. People noticed that jumpers, which used to last for years, began to pill after the first week, and cotton shirts lost their shape after a single wash. It was a systemic crisis. When production is scattered across dozens of factories in different corners of the globe, controlling every stitch the way it was done at family-run businesses in England became physically impossible. Marks & Spencer fell into the middle ground trap. They were no longer a premium brand with a British soul, but they couldn't compete on price with ultra-cheap giants like Primark. They became just another shop, losing their primary superpower, uniqueness. Visually, it looked like the degradation of the high street. Previously, the M&S clothing department was a beacon of order and reliability. Now, it often resembled a warehouse of generic items of questionable quality. Attempts to attract a younger crowd through questionable designer collaborations only alienated the core, loyal audience, the grandmothers and mothers who believed in M&S like a Bible. By losing control over the needle and thread, the company lost the right to be called the face of Britain. Quality ceased to be a philosophy and became just another line in a financial report, one that was constantly optimized until almost nothing remained. By the mid-2010s, a strange and painful schism had occurred within Marks & Spencer. While the food halls flourished, offering innovative and high-quality products, the clothing departments turned into quiet backwaters of disappointment. This created a situation unique in retail. A customer would enter the store for elite wine and artisan cheese, but walk past the clothing racks, trying not to look at the shapeless acrylic jumpers. The tragedy of M&S hits hard through this visual contrast, the brilliance of gastronomy versus the gloom of the wardrobe. Those who for decades had bought everything here, from socks to party dresses, suddenly felt homeless in their own favorite store. Britain's middle class faced a dilemma. For the older generation, a visit to M&S had always been a ritual of reliability. But now, women standing in fitting rooms discovered that sizes had become inconsistent and fabrics unpleasantly scratchy. The brand that had always understood the real figures of Britons began flailing in attempts to chase youth trends that looked absurd on classic M&S mannequins. The loss of loyalty wasn't instant, but cumulative, like a crack in a favorite cup that grows deeper with every wash. Customers began migrating to John Lewis for quality or to Zara for style, leaving M&S in a dead zone between them. This period became a time of lost identity. M&S stores began to look as if they didn't know who they existed for. Attempts to change interior designs to something colder and more minimalist only highlighted the lack of warmth and that very community spirit present in the St. Michael era. We see footage of empty clothing floors in the middle of a working day and realize the company had lost touch with its tribe. Britons used to say, "If you don't know what to buy, go to Marks." Now people said, "Only go to Marks for a sandwich." It was a verdict on decades of reputation as the nation's primary clothing store. Today, Marks & Spencer exists in a state of eternal transformation. The company remains a giant with multi-billion-pound turnovers, but its influence on British culture has irrevocably changed. We live in a world where fast fashion has conditioned us to disposable goods, and against this backdrop, M&S's attempts to return to its roots look like tilting at windmills. Occasionally, echoes of past greatness flicker in the collections, a cashmere sweater or a well-made overcoat, but trust built over a century cannot be restored by a single successful ad campaign. The Aberfan tragedy or the Great Cold of 1987 were natural disasters, but the death of British quality at M&S is a man-made catastrophe, the slow fading of what was once the nation's gold standard. This finale hits hard with the realization of an irreplaceable loss. When M&S closes its historic stores in old town centers, it is felt like the demolition of a monument. With them goes an era when things mattered, when buying a shirt was an investment, not an impulsive act of consumption. The story of Marks & Spencer is a bitter lesson for any business. As soon as you place margins above craftsmanship and shareholder interests above the interests of a seamstress in Lancashire, you lose more than just production. You lose the right to be part of the national identity. A brand's soul isn't in its logo, but in the people who create it and the customer's confidence that they won't be cheated for an extra pound of profit. Looking at modern M&S window displays, we see the ghost of what this store once meant to Britain. It is a reminder that quality is not a luxury, but a form of respect for the individual. While the company tries to find a balance between online sales and gastronomy, the nation is still waiting for the return of that same St. Michael, not as a brand, but as a principle. The lesson of Aberfan taught us responsibility for lives. The lesson of 87 taught us resilience. And the story of M&S teaches us that the true value of things lies in their honesty. And until that honesty returns to the high street, British quality will remain just a beautiful legend of the past, one we continue to retell with a faint sense of sadness.